noch nicht erkennen, ebenso wenig einen Fall von, wie er es formulierte, echtem Kannibalismus. Aber auch Tötung auf Verlangen, die Tat hatte sich in diesem Haus in Wüstefeld ereignet, sah der Richter nicht. Vielmehr versuchte er deutlich zu machen, in welchem Grenzbereich, juristisch wie menschlich, er sich bei der Urteilssuche bewegt habe. Er sei
One of the greatest gifts the internet has given us is the ability to connect with just about everyone, allowing us to find niches and communities with very obscure yet common interests. Hobbies could be shared, fantasies could be fulfilled, lovers could be found. There is a place for everything and everyone online. But just like our offline world, there are some places that you just shouldn't seek. Because if you do, some of them might lead you right into the jaws of a predator. Today's story is one that, in my opinion, captures the essence of the internet and how it changed the way the world works. It is extremely morbid, disturbing, and quite disgusting, but it's also kind of funny and ironic in some of the ways things happen within this story. Fortunately and unfortunately, I can't really show you anything that deals with the story outside of some B-roll footage and some images that I've gathered due to the nature of how this story unfolds. Because what we are about to discuss today is a piece of media that has been locked behind German police evidence lockers for, well, since it came to light in the first place, as it was deemed too much for the public to handle and is probably never going to be shown in public so long as we're alive, making this a piece of lost media. And since I can't really show much of what's going on within this video, I decided that it would be kind of a cool idea to go back to the old style of content we used to do before the last couple of videos. This is still going to be the exact same quality as I've been trying to put out, so hopefully this doesn't scare you off. Anyways, I hope you guys all enjoy, and thank you for being here. As stated before, the internet is home to almost anything that your imagination can come up with. But in the late 90s to early 2000s, this was even more so of the case, as almost every single interest had its own niche little corner on the internet. Various topics and interests were hosted by their own message and image boards, blogs, and of course, websites, with people from all over the world gathering to these corners of the internet with intent to meet new people and indulge in fantasies where they otherwise could not. Back in these days, the internet was not as polished or really looked at the same way it is nowadays, allowing for a lot more disturbing and sometimes downright illegal content to be hosted online. There are still websites like this that you can find on the ClearNet today, but not as much since the complete corporate takeover of the internet has happened. But back then it was much more prevalent, and what we consider to be the ever so spooky dark web, deep net, or whatever you want to call it, was nothing compared to the way Web 1.0 was shown. And the forums that we're going to be talking about in today's story are a perfect example of that, as this story begins with necrobabes.com. Necrobabes.com was a subscription-based web forum that hosted a lot of fetish and shock websites. These websites were pay for access for the most part, with a wide array of snuff, which none were allegedly actually real. All of the videos and photos were made by actors who were playing dead, simulating strangulations, stabbings, and all other forms of snuff-style content. Being that it was all allegedly fantasy, it was a kind of pure, kind of cleaner way for people to get their fetish content. Well, as clean as faking shock content can get. But Necrobabes had a sister website, and this is what we're going to be talking about mainly, necrobabes.net. Which necrobabes.net hosted a lot more free content. This website allowed various different user-generated content, roleplay threads, fan fiction, user-to-user requests, and honestly anything else you can think of. This website is an entire rabbit hole that I will probably be talking about way more in detail in a later video. But for this video's sake, just know that because of the user-generated content, this website would get into a lot of trouble and a lot of legal issues later down the line, most of which was hidden under the guise of roleplay and fantasy, and some of which wasn't even found out to be real until the unfolding of the events in this story. But one of the main things that necrobabes.net would become known for were its cannibal forums, specifically Cannibal Cafe. Cannibal Cafe was not the only cannibal-based forum hosted, as there was actually a bunch more that existed before it did, but it's the forum that ties most heavily within the story. The vast majority of the users on these forums were mainly just role players, people who got off on the idea of being eaten, but not the actual action itself. But there was one user who was very active on these forums, and he was not role-playing. Armin Meiwes, born 1961 in Essen, Germany, which is a little ironic because that means to eat in German. Born to Waltraud and Gustav Meiwes, he was the youngest of 3 brothers. When Armin was 3, him and his family moved from Essen to the hamlet of Worcesterfield. Now, I'm not German obviously, so mind the pronunciation. With their new home being a 44-room manor that, even during the time of them being fully moved in, stayed relatively empty through their time living there. Worcesterfield was a very quaint area with just about 30 people living there, not many of those being kids. When Armin was 8 years old, his father ended up abandoning him and the family. His older brothers, around this time as well, left the house as they were trying to figure out their career paths and what they wanted to do with themselves, effectively making all of the men in Armin's life disappear overnight. This left both Armin and his mother completely mentally scarred, leaving both of them feeling totally alone and leaving Armin neglected. Armin was reportedly very close to his father before they left, stating that he was one of a more caring and easygoing lifestyle, where his mother was a little too extravagant for Armin's tastes. This left Armin with a very strong fear of abandonment, as I think it would literally anyone, and it also left him with a desire for a partner that would never leave his side. After the men in his family left, Waltraud, his mother, started becoming increasingly more abusive towards Armin. She was notoriously controlling and domineering, not only in Armin's life, but a lot of her husband's lives as well, as we'll talk about later. She was even later described by psychologists as a tyrant and a misandrist, who was completely determined to make her youngest's life revolve around her fully. She had a history of difficult relationships. Both her ex-husbands cited her mental cruelty as grounds for divorce. One of them, the father of one of Armin's half-brothers, even committed suicide because of her, allegedly. By some accounts and some documentaries, Waltraud did not even want another child, but she had one anyways to have her husband not be able to leave. After the divorce, she poured all of her energy into trying to get Armin's life to revolve around her, with increasing velocity and increasing abuse. She expected from Armin absolute obedience, usually ending up in her guilt-tripping Armin into doing everything around the house, which kind of made him more of a maid than an actual loving child, as she almost neglected every other emotion this kid had. She would even go on to demean him by giving him the nickname Männchen, which is a girl name in German. She would also go on to openly belittle and humiliate him in front of her friends and other people, telling all of his more embarrassing stories. Even as he got older, her demeanor around him did not change. Actually, it only really got worse. Any attempt that Armin would make to try and garner some sort of independence was swiftly taken out by his mother. When Armin eventually tried to date girls, his mother was always backseat driving and was there constantly, basically putting a block between him and any real relationship. Some reports even claim that up until he was 20, he would be going to bed at 10 p.m. sharp as if he were still a child, which also he still had a sign up on his door that read child's room up until then as well. She did not let him grow without her, always looking down on him, always belittling him, and damaging his growth for her own personal gain. He became known around town as more of a dedicated mama's boy than anything else, basically doing whatever he could to win over her affection. He also rarely left her side willingly. However, this was also met with constant beratement from his mother, which would sometimes be very, very public. He would always end up forgiving her for these outbursts, however, which only fed more into her actions. This very obviously left Armin isolated. Outside of his mother, he had almost no one, and he was never able to actually form any meaningful connections. Due to Armin's loneliness after his dad left him, he started to create an imaginary brother for himself, one that he could rely on his times of need. Frankie, who was Armin's only real connection outside of his mother, who according to Armin was actually based off of a school friend that he had at the time who was named Frank. He was the one who inspired him because of the way that Frank was. Very dedicated, very loyal, and always there when you needed him. And he was also a very good listener. He would constantly talk to Frankie, telling him his deepest and darkest secrets and his deepest and darkest desires. As very early on in Armin's life, at 8 years old, around the time where his dad left, he started to get a very dark imagination, as he would very quickly start fantasizing about killing and eating his schoolmates, and also Frankie himself. So that way he would always be a part of him, as he believed if he ate someone, they could never leave him. This was only exacerbated by his newfound obsession, Hansel and Gretel, for the exact reasons that you are thinking of right now. The part of the story that really caught his attention the most, however, was when the witch captures Hansel to fatten him up and eat him. And again, at age 10, he would get another obsession, Robinson Crusoe, which spurred on more of his cannibalistic tendencies, as there is a character in Robinson Crusoe who is a ritualistic cannibal, and he thought that it was very interesting that it could be done in a normalized and ritualistic way. These were not his only inspirations for this, however, as when he was a kid, when he would go down to their summer homes, he would be spending a lot of time with butchers, as this was the 60s, and I guess kids could just go down to the local butcher house and watch them without any repercussions. This, of course, made him very good at, well, butchering. These fantasies, of course, later down his life when he started to hit puberty, would start to take a more sexual tone to them. Since his mother forbade him from dating women during this time, which only tightened the strangling hold that she already had on his life, it made things a little more complicated for Armin. On top of this, the relationships he did eventually get to have were very short-lived, as he found out that he was gay, making things even more complicated for Armin, as he couldn't have what he deemed as a normal relationship of the time, which also made him a lot more lonely, allowing for his fantasies to take a darker and more twisted turn, as if they weren't already bad enough already. Armin's mother did not leave him alone even after he was 20. As a matter of fact, she would be a suffocating force within his life up until his 30s, when she finally passed away. This meant that he was never able to actually form any relationships outside of her. But luckily, for a while, Armin actually found a really good outlet and a way to sort of get away from his mother. It also allowed him to build up camaraderie and community and start to actually form some adult relationships. The military. He served in the German military for 12 years, enlisting in 1981. During this time, he was training as a non-commissioned officer and an administrative specialist. Eventually, he gained the rank Staff Sergeant. Unfortunately, this job did not stop his mom from intervening, as she was reported to constantly still be with him and even refused to not be with him during this time and during his time in the military, staying in hotels and bunks with her as she refused to leave. She would also go out on the troop outings that he would have with his troop, which made him look even more like a mama's boy and again pushed him away from people. And as an added unfortunality here, he was stationed in Rodenburg, which was not too far off from his mom's house, which is where he ended up staying while he served here. This did help his loneliness, however. He did make friends in the military and was actually very admired for his time in the military by the other troops. However, his career in the military would come to an end after his second second DWI, both of which had resulted in crashes, but the second one finally got his license revoked and his job taken, leaving him yet again alone with his mother. And as stated previously, it wouldn't be until her death in 1999 where she stopped being such a driving force. He would finally, truly be alone. This, of course, sent him right off of the deep end and completely broke Armin. Once his mother died, this was one of the most influential moments in his life, as he had no one to keep his urges at bay anymore. And as you can imagine, being one of the only figures in his life outside of an imaginary brother since he was 8 years old, this completely destroyed him. And I think if I lost that person too, I would kind of go insane, which he did. He very much did. The moment that his mother died, he became increasingly infatuated with online posts and forums, several of which, of course, were cannibal forums. He adopted the username Frankie for the exact reason that you think. During this period, Meiwes became an active user of several online communities, including a Yahoo group chat for gay cannibal fetishists, because you really can find anything online. And of course, he took part in the controversial Cannibal Cafe forum, where users shared fantasies about consuming human flesh. Meiwes posted detailed advertisements seeking a willing young man to be slaughtered and eaten, often specifying age and physical attributes. These posts were initially assumed by many to just be roleplay because they kind of look like any other post you would find online, or at least in these forums. But Meiwes in these posts made it very clear that he was looking for someone who was willing to be butchered and consumed. Between 1999 and 2001, Meiwes was reportedly active with multiple men who all responded to his advertisements and were actually kinda serious about it. In a lot of these cases, he would actually meet up with these men and participate in cannibal roleplay, whatever that means. But none of these encounters actually led into any violence, as most of the men would end up backing out when things felt a little too serious. Meiwes consistently abided by this, by the way, because in his mind, his victim needed to consent, otherwise his fantasy could not be fulfilled. It wasn't just that he needed consent, however, for his victims. He was also reportedly very picky with who was going to be his victim. Meiwes had established a very specific age and physique that he was going for, and if anyone responded that didn't match those, they weren't getting eaten. He frequently requested that all applicants must be between the ages of 18 and 38 and had to be cute and fit. He turned down several willing participants because of the age and their looks. One of them was too fat for him, apparently, which I thought that's what they wanted. I thought cannibals would like that kind of thing. He also declined individuals who appeared to be into the violence aspect of this whole thing, stating that his fantasy required consensual submission and not brutality. Meiwes apparently refused a very enthusiastic applicant who wanted to be nailed down and beaten to death, which Meiwes found completely incompatible with his fantasy, and it was too far for him, stating that it would just be too weird to beat him to death. Which, I mean, I guess the gay cannibal has standards for how he wants to do it, you know, there's a line for that kind of thing. He would go on to turn down a lot of applicants, and it did start to kind of frustrate him, but he would never break the idea of having a consensual meal. And this pattern would basically continue up until February of 2001, when through a gay cannibal Yahoo group chat, he got a message that actually kind of piqued his interest. The message was titled "Dinner or Your Dinner," which read, "I offer myself to you and will let you dine from my live body, not butchery, dining." This message was sent by Brandis, a 43-year-old engineer who had his own fascination with pain from his own flavor of family trauma, as during his childhood, his mother committed suicide, leaving Brandis in a very hostile and abusive household. This piqued Armin's interest a lot. He finally had someone who was consenting and wasn't too weird. But I'm honestly not sure why Armin didn't turn him down since he was 43 and that was out of his age range, but I guess beggars can't be choosers. Over the following weeks, the two men exchanged numerous emails and chat messages, many of which were later retrieved and used during Meiwes' trial. The conversations were detailed and graphic, covering every aspect of the act, including how Brandis wanted to be sedated, mutilated, killed, butchered, and consumed. They also discussed his physical preferences, potential methods of execution, and even the fate of specific body parts. The cutting of Brandis's penis was, according to one of the exes during the trial, a fantasy that he has always had, that he would continuously ask for. He had begged his previous partner to cut off his penis during sex, which obviously was refused because he thought it was just like a joke. The day that they finally met up was March 9th of 2001, a full month before the Cannibal Cafe forums were ever even up, which a lot of people get this confused and think that this whole interaction happened on Cannibal Cafe. It did not. It happened within a gay cannibal Yahoo group chat. So there's that. Before this meetup even occurred, Brandis would go on to liquidate just about every asset that he had and sold everything that he owned. He purchased a one-way ticket to Castle in which Armin would pick him up, which he drove him to the isolated manor that he's been living in for the past 45 years. Upon entering the house, Brandis stripped down naked voluntarily and reportedly told Meiwes, "I want you to admire your dinner." The two men proceeded to have consensual sex, after which Brandis initially changed his mind, which Armin then agreed to take him back to the station, but Brandis had second thoughts. The reason for this being that during this time, Brandis was actually already in a relationship, and he thought it would be easier to be butchered and eaten than it was to explain to his then partner that he sold all of their stuff to cheat on him with a gay cannibal he met online, which in my opinion, I guess is kind of fair. That would be kind of hard to explain. Once back at the manor, they began the preparations, as Brandis would then go on to take a lot of sleeping pills and a lot of alcohol to try and numb out the pain. Meiwes then attempted to bite Brandis's penis off, which did not work, so they ended up cutting it off instead, which, as you can imagine, some sleeping pills and some alcohol is not going to dull the pain by any means when you're getting your wiener chopped off or bitten off, attempted to be bitten off, which, according to Armin, led to Brandis screaming for 30 seconds and then just stopping as if he was completely fine. And as Armin figured in their group chat, trying to eat the raw was going to be a task, and it was nearly impossible to do, so he opted to instead fry it up with some garlic, but this ended up letting it burn, so he just kind of wasted it, which he ended up feeding it to his dog, which I don't know if you guys know this, but feeding your dog garlic is actually very bad for them, and that is irresponsible to do as a pet owner. With Brandis bleeding profusely, Meiwes decided that he was going to run a warm bath for him so that way he can bleed out in comfortability. As Brandis was laying in the tub for several hours bleeding out, Armin was in the other room reading a Star Trek novel and would check in on him every 15 minutes or so just to see how things were going. At one point, Brandis attempted to leave the tub, but knocked out due to blood loss. After nearly 4 hours had passed, Armin finally decided that it was time, took him up to the bedroom, and slit his throat. Following the killing, Armin put Brandis on a meat hook upside down and began the butchering process. This included the removal of all of the internal organs and parts that were inedible. With the rest of the meat, he packaged all of it and hid them in a false bottom in his freezer that was covered by pizzas, which I guess is the best way you can hide a pack of human meat. The remainder of the body was buried in the yard of the manor, which would later be found. He preserved over 45 pounds of human meat. As this was Armin's first time, he wanted to make it something special, so he ended up setting out his table with candles and his finest silverware. He would go on to prepare a rump steak with Brussels sprouts and some African wine, describing it himself saying, "The first bite was, of course, very strange. It was a feeling I can't really describe. I spent over 40 years dreaming about this, and then it finally happened. Meiwes stated that with every single bite, he felt closer to Brandis. He believed that by consuming him, they were joined together permanently in some ritualistic fashion. He went on to tell investigators, "Through the flesh, I remembered him. Every bite made him a part of me. It brought us closer." At last, Armin got exactly what he was desiring for basically since he was 8. A consenting adult who was, I guess, his type, being a part of him forever in the flesh, literally. Unfortunately for Armin, however, this interaction did not stop the urges, as we are about to see. About a month after the butchering of Brandis, he would go back onto the Cannibal forums and start posting again, this time including Cannibal Cafe, which was up and running at the time. He began soliciting new victims and starting to post his applications again, in which he would put detailed advertisements in these fetish communities about how he would want someone to volunteer for the same fate. He would also constantly boast about finally eating someone on these forums, making him somewhat of a celebrity within the roleplay communities because they thought he was just really good at it. However, they did not understand that he was being very dead serious, and this was not roleplay for him, and he was, in fact, looking for a new victim. In December of 2002, a student from Innsbruck, Austria, browsing one of these forums, came across Meiwes' post and was directly disturbed by its realism and the level of detail that he was using during these posts. Apparently, what tipped him off was the fact that Meiwes, unlike everyone else on this website, was using past tense, as if he's already done it. Believing that these posts might be genuine, the student reported it to the German police. This triggered a formal investigation. Once this happened, German police traced the forum activity of Meiwes' IP address, identifying him through his online alias Frankie. They obtained a warrant and conducted a raid on his home in Westfield on December 10th of 2002. Upon searching his household, the investigators discovered human flesh stored in the freezer underneath the pizzas, the bones and the body parts that were in the garden, and a 4-hour-long VHS tape documenting the entire event and everything that happened on the night of Brandis' death. And of course the chats and the emails that Brandis and Armin had, along with all the other emails and chats that Armin had discussing the butchering and the cannibalism. News of this case spread like wildfire across Germany, and of course ended up making its way to the rest of the world relatively quickly, as it was such a wild turn of events and wild case, no one ever suspected it, especially because of the consensual aspect of this crime. This was sensationalized as the first and only known consensual act of cannibalism, which started a lot of debates, as we'll get into soon. Authorities were particularly challenged by this case as well, because it turns out during this time, it was technically legal in Germany to cannibalize someone, which as a result of this, the investigation had to go for other charges, such as murder for sexual gratification and disturbing the peace of the dead, which obviously that might come to a shock for some people that technically eating someone was completely legal in this country for some reason, but I'm pretty sure the German lawmakers never thought that this would even happen in the first place. They also, of course, had evidence stating that he was willing to do this again given the chance, so they were not about to let this dude walk. His trial started in March of 2003, which very quickly became one of the most historical trials in German history due to the amount of complications in the legal system during this time for this case. As stated earlier, cannibalism was technically legal in Germany and there were no laws against it. But that was not its only legal hurdle. And actually, the biggest hurdle they had was the consensual nature, as Brandis in multiple chat logs and even in the video itself was constantly giving his consent, even going so far as to plan actions in his own death and how things would play out. Meiwes' defense used this in their favor, trying to argue that there was no malice or violent or premeditated criminal actions going on here due to that. The prosecution, however, decided that they were going with the sexual aspect of this case and pointed to that as the main reason that he could not be walking free. And in order to prove to the judges that this was for sexual gratification, they decided that they were going to play the tape. Out of the 4 hours, only 19 minutes of this tape was shown, as it was deemed more than enough to show that it was for sexual gratification. It was also just too disturbing for people to keep watching. The tape was not shown to the jury or any of the public and has since been locked away in a German police evidence locker since, and it will probably never be shown. There are, however, 3 quote-unquote leaked images that look fairly real. I'm not going to show them here because this video is already not going to get monetized, I don't think. But if I show that, it is guaranteed to hit this video, so I'm just not going to chance it. There's no way to know for certain if they are real. They're more than likely not, though, because how would it possibly be that these got out? The jury did not reach a verdict on this until 2004, which was manslaughter, which they believed, due to the consensual nature of the act, it could not be murder. There was no malice here. This gave him 8 years and 6 months in prison, which was very controversial at the time, as you know, he literally ate someone. But there was a retrial given in 2006. This one was due to the public outcry, as they were just like, no, there's no way we're letting this dude walk after 8 years. And due to this retrial, the German federal court overturned the manslaughter charges. During this trial, the prosecutors focused very heavily on the sexual nature of the act, arguing that Brandis's consent was legally irrelevant, mainly due to his mental instability, as no one in their right mind would consensually be murdered. And on top of this, even if it was consensual, the actual act itself was completely illegal and outside of the law. A court-appointed psychiatrist also testified that Meiwes was a high-risk reoffender and that his cannibalistic urges did not disappear, which should have been very apparent the first time around, but honestly, whatever. On May 10th of 2006, the court found Meiwes guilty of murder and sentenced him to life. He was not eligible for parole, and he was also deemed a threat to public safety, so there was no bail or anything for him. So now, he has been sitting, as of today, in prison serving that life sentence. But that is not the end of the story, and actually, the ending of the story is what made me want to make this video in the first place. Since Armin's incarceration, he has become what the prison guards have described as a model prisoner. Prison officials have consistently described Armin as completely cooperative and friendly, calm, and is just easygoing all around. It is said that he has posed absolutely no disciplinary issues, and his lawyer has remarked that he is absolutely manageable. He shows no sign of aggression and helps wherever he can. He also participates in the prison choir, works in the laundry department, spends his free time reading and reflecting, and is considered one of the less problematic prisoners that they have there. In interviews and according to psychiatric assessments, Meiwes has stated that he regrets his actions and would never do them again, as his cannibalistic tendencies are completely gone, and he now understands the moral and legal heaviness of what he did. In recent years, he's actually been permitted to leave. He would go out to parks and stuff wearing a disguise, which usually was just glasses and a hat. Despite this, however, his release is not imminent, and there is no indication of him getting parole, so he's probably still going to be serving life. In 2017, he was actually considered for parole, but it was swiftly turned down. The court didn't want to chance anything, and they didn't want him to pose any public threat whatsoever. But probably the most ironic twist a story could possibly have is how Armin has decided to spend the rest of his life, specifically in the dining habits that he has. As during his time in prison, Armin has decided that he is now a vegetarian. He has told journalists and psychologists that he no longer is eating meat, as the act that he has committed and the weight that it has had on him has completely turned him off from it. This action is frequently interpreted as a regret of his actions by both the public and by journalists, which has to be kind of insulting to Brandis despite him being eaten. Genuinely, imagine being butchered and eaten by some dude who you set this whole thing up with, only for him then to turn vegetarian afterwards. This, of course, left Germany and the wider true crime community with a debate about how much consent you can legally give, which, in my opinion, in this debate, I think I gotta side with the court here. There is no way that you were stable enough to consent to your own life ending in a way like this. Being technically just butchered and tortured and left to bleed out for several hours is not exactly what the brain is wired to do, so there is no way to say that he was in his right mind to even give consent in the first place. So no, I do not think that this counts as someone giving their consent to cannibalism, and is more a case where Armin took advantage of someone who is mentally unstable and committed a very, very heinous act. But hey, that's just my opinion on it. Let me know down in the comments what you believe in. The internet can be a very, very cool tool and a very cool place, but also a very dangerous place. It hosts just about everything that you can think of, and the very unfortunate truth of it is, it will always host them, so long as you know where to go and where to look for them. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video, and have a good night.